All right, I want you to picture this. You are stationed on a tiny, craggy rock, 20 miles from absolutely anywhere. All around you, there's just nothing. Nothing but the dark, violent ocean of the Outer Hebrides. It's just you, two other guys, and the relentless, deafening crash of the waves. Welcome to Eilean Mor. Today we're unpacking an explanator of a story that has completely baffled investigators for over a century. It's a true cold case, and honestly, it is steeped in this incredibly eerie, almost suffocating atmosphere.
So, we have to ask the obvious question. What actually happens when three men just vanish into thin air? Let's dive into this. Back in December of 1900, three highly experienced lighthouse keepers seemingly walked right off the edge of the world. And the craziest part? They left behind no bodies and absolutely no note explaining where they went. It's one of those situations that just completely defies logic. How do three seasoned, veteran professionals disappear from an isolated island without a single trace? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're going to break down today.
Now, to really grasp the scale of this mystery, we have to jump back to 1899. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was newly built right at the highest point of Eilean Mor. At the time, it was an absolute marvel of modern engineering, specifically designed to withstand the brutal, punishing sea. Stationed out there were three of the best guys you could ask for: Principal Keeper James Ducat, Second Assistant Thomas Marshall, and Occasional Keeper Donald MacArthur. You have to remember, these weren't rookies. They were hardened seafarers who intimately knew the extreme dangers of the ocean.
For just over a year, their life was all about this simple, ultra-strict routine. Man the lighthouse, keep the light shining, and keep passing ships safe. Day in, day out. But on December 15, 1900, that routine was completely shattered. Right around midnight, a cargo ship called the SS Archtor was passing by Eilean Mor. The crew looked out toward the shore, expecting to see the beacon, and saw nothing. Just pure darkness. The light had gone out.
You know, what makes this whole timeline so agonizing is the delay. See, the captain of the Archtor actually reported the dark lighthouse the minute he docked, but because of a whole series of communication errors, the message just got lost. 10 entire days passed. 10 agonizing days where that lighthouse sat in utter darkness before anyone back on the mainland even realized that something was terribly wrong out on the Flannan Isles.
So as you can imagine, the tension is just building as the days tick by. It wasn't until Boxing Day, December 26th, that the relief vessel Hesperus finally arrived. On board was a new keeper, Joseph Mor. Actually, Mor had happily delayed his trip to spend Christmas with his family, and honestly, that delay almost certainly saved his life. As the ship approached the island, the crew fired off a warning rocket to let the men know they were there. The response? Absolute terrifying silence.
I really want you to put yourself in Joseph Mor's shoes for a second. He's sent ashore entirely alone. He has to climb these 160 steep wooden steps in dead silence. And then he begins this chilling, step-by-step discovery of the empty lighthouse. First, he notices the entrance gate is securely closed. Okay, normal enough. But then, the kitchen door is left wide open. He steps inside, looks at the fire in the grate, and it's nothing but cold ashes.
The realization hits him immediately. This was absolutely not a planned departure. Mor basically walked into a scene perfectly frozen in time. The clock on the wall stopped at 11:30. A chair was knocked over on the floor, like someone jumped up in a panic. Sitting right there on the table was a half-eaten meal of meat and potatoes. The beds were totally unmade. The only living thing left in that entire massive lighthouse was the men's pet canary, just sitting there half-starved on its perch. It's completely surreal.
But as Mor and the search party start digging deeper, the clues get even more baffling. They checked the gear and found that 2 sets of the keeper's heavy outdoor oilskins and sea boots were missing. But one set, Donald MacArthur's, was still hanging right there on its hook. Think about that. This means MacArthur left the safety of the lighthouse in just his shirt sleeves, right in the middle of a freezing December storm. That directly violates the absolute strictest rule of the lighthouse service. One man must always stay inside.
Okay, so the physical evidence is strange enough, right? But the written evidence, that is where this whole thing turns into a full-on psychological thriller. Investigators eventually found the official logbook, and what they read inside basically outlined a sheer descent into darkness. The final entries, which were written by Thomas Marshall, are widely considered the absolute most bizarre and chilling clues of this entire investigation.
Let's just walk through these final, incredibly bizarre days. On December 12th, Marshall reports severe winds. Winds he says he hadn't seen the likes of in 20 years. Then, on the 13th, he explicitly notes that the men are praying.
But here is the eerie contradiction that makes this mystery so legendary. When you look at the official weather records for those exact days, there were absolutely no severe storms in the area. None. The weather was actually perfectly calm. So, what exactly were they fighting?
It gets worse. On December 13th, Marshall wrote a particularly unsettling entry. He wrote, "Ducat, quiet, MacArthur, crying." Just let that sink in for a moment. Donald MacArthur was known everywhere as this incredibly tough, hardened seafarer with a really fiery temper. What could possibly be happening out on that rock to reduce a man like that to tears? The sheer psychological dread trapped inside that lighthouse must have been completely overwhelming.
And then, we finally reach the last entry, logged on December 15th, which, remember, is the exact same day the light went out. It reads, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." Wow, it is such a haunting, poetic, and just incredibly final sentiment. It was literally the last thing any of them ever wrote before vanishing into thin air. It really leaves us with this deeply unsettling atmosphere right before we pivot to look at the physical investigation.
So Robert Muirhead was the guy brought in to lead the official investigation and try to make some sense of all this chaos. Now, while the interior of the lighthouse was practically untouched, Muirhead found a very, very different story outside. Down on the western landing stage, there was absolute devastation. We're talking thick iron railings that were completely twisted and broken. And get this, a block of solid stone weighing a full ton had been physically torn from its place.
Seeing that massive destruction led Muirhead straight to the official, accepted explanation, pointing to a very real-life monster, a rogue wave, sometimes called a roller. We are talking about a massive, sudden, and devastatingly powerful surge of ocean water that just strikes without any warning. I mean, to put that into perspective, when you think about the sheer, unimaginable force required to rip a 1-ton stone block out of the ground, you really start to realize the terrifying power of the ocean.
So, Muirhead's final conclusion pulled all these physical clues together into this one tragic sequence of events. He believed Ducat and Marshall were likely down at the landing stage in their oilskins, trying to secure equipment during rough seas. A sudden, massive rogue wave approached. MacArthur, up in the lighthouse, saw the danger, knocked over his chair in a panic, and sprinted out in his shirt sleeves to warn them. But he was too late, and the freak wave simply swept all three men out to sea in an instant.
Honestly, it's a very clean, logical explanation. But the ocean never gave up its secrets. Because no bodies were ever recovered, this case just refused to stay closed in the public's mind. That absolute lack of physical closure, it's basically acted as an incubator for a whole century of wild alternative theories. As you can guess, faced with the unknown, human imagination just ran totally wild. The theories started pouring in, ranging from a tragic murder-suicide, some people suggested MacArthur snapped in a rage and threw himself off the cliff, to claims of ghost ships or even alien abductions. There are even old local legends claiming the men were transformed into the 3 giant black birds that Joseph Moore saw perched on the lighthouse when he first arrived. But setting the myths aside, the reality of the aftermath is just grounded in deep, profound trauma. Joseph Moore, the guy who walked up those stairs and into that empty kitchen, only stayed on the island for 3 more months. He actually begged for a transfer, completely unable to shake the crushing isolation and this paranoid feeling that he was constantly being watched. The island did remain inhabited by keepers until 1971, when the lighthouse was finally automated, leaving Eilean Mor completely silent once again.
The clock stopped, the meal went cold, and 3 experienced men walked into a storm they never came back from, leaving behind these incredibly bizarre logbook entries and a mystery that still grips us over 100 years later. Look at all the evidence we've covered in this explainer today. Was it simply the tragic, overwhelming power of a rogue wave, or did something far more sinister happen out there in the dark? I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think really happened on the island of no return?